Welcome this evening. I'm glad to see such a great turnout from everybody. This is our annual meeting of the Board of Selectmen, the Appropriations Committee, the Financial Planning Committee, and the K-8 School Committee. And the purpose of the meeting this evening is to give you an update with regard to our financial trend monitoring. I say this every year. This is, next to town meeting, in my opinion, the most important meeting that we hold all year. This will set the table for our upcoming budget cycle for fiscal 20. And I know it's hard to believe we just closed out fiscal 18. We began fiscal 19, and we're already well into the planning process for fiscal 20. In terms of the agenda this evening, as I said, we're here to kind of set the table and give you folks a sense of where we are at this point in our planning process. We're going to cover a few things. We're going to cover the updated financial indicators. So this is the latest information as we look backwards in terms of our trend analysis. We're also going to go over 5-year projections based on the most recent updated assumptions. So that's our look forward 5 years. And then I know the thing everybody's always most interested in is based on our assumptions, where we've been, where it is we say we're going to go. What does it look like in terms of the potential tax impact? Because one of the key goals of the Board of Selectmen, of course, is to maintain Northborough as an affordable place in which to live and to have a business. And then last but not least, the most important aspect of this meeting, in my opinion, is bringing all the major policy boards and committees together in one place to hear the same information, to identify opportunities or issues that we might need to address, and to begin a policy discussion regarding potential opportunities or issues as they're arising. You know, our goal as staff always is to identify any opportunities or potential issues before they're before you in a manner where it requires immediate attention, where you have to make an immediate decision. So by looking out, we want to forecast these things so we can have an intelligent discussion, have time to do appropriate research, frame the issues for you so that a policy decision is made from a position of strength with good information and good process. So we have a lot of new faces, school committee members, financial planning, Board of Selectmen. I want to take a couple minutes. Last year, I sped through kind of the setup to what are financial indicators and how do we measure our financial condition. So I want to take a moment to give a little bit of information there. On your desk before each of you is a copy of the presentation. Now, I'm loath to give my presentation out ahead of time because you're all like me and you just start reading through and flipping forward. That's exactly what I would do. But I'm not going to cover every slide, and I'm not going to cover every slide in the same amount of detail. So I want you to have the whole presentation. But I am going to move through some of these, particularly the indicators that haven't moved much and have continued from the beginning to be favorable and remain favorable. It's nice to know that they're still there, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time giving a lot of background. But I think it is important for us to talk for a moment about what is the whole point of measuring financial condition. So just by broad definition, because financial condition means something different to different people, in our context it means our ability to maintain our existing level of services, being able to withstand normal impacts of regional disruptions, economic cycles, potential recessions, which we'll talk a little bit about later on in the presentation tonight, but also to meet just the natural growth demands. As we grow, we might need more police or fire or resources for different departments. And so the idea here is if we're looking at our good financial condition, we're able to do all of these things. Now, when we talk about financial condition, we talk about it on several different aspects. Cash solvency, budgetary, long run, and service delivery. Just very briefly, cash solvency is your ability to pay your bills as they come in the next 30 days. If you're not cash solvent, you are in absolute fiscal crisis. I'm happy to report, I'll spare you the suspense, we are not in fiscal crisis. We are cash solvent. Most of the discussions that take place with regard to municipal finances at a policy level like you folks is regarding budgetary solvency. And by that, you know, we create a budget and we want to make sure at the end of the year we're in the black, right? We don't want to be in a deficit at the end of our fiscal year. And legally, we cannot be in a deficit at the start of a year. We are legally required to have a balanced budget. We also want to have that perspective about long-range obligations, things like our debt obligations, pensions, unfunded liabilities, things of that nature. There has to be a process and a time where you interject those long-range considerations into the decisions that we're all going to be making in the next several months with regard to fiscal 2020. Last but not least, I always say you can be cash solvent, your budget can be balanced, and you can even be taking care of all of your long-range obligations, but still have a fundamental flaw, and that is if you aren't a service level solvent. And that means if the class size at the schools is 40 kids, if crime's running rampant, if the potholes can't get fixed, it's nice that you have a balanced budget, but you're not meeting the core mission and goals of what your organization exists for. And you have to balance all of these different aspects of financial condition. And if you don't, then it's legs of a stool. You're not going to have a viable budget process and a viable outcome. Now, in terms of financial trend monitoring, this isn't something unique that the financial team came up with. This is a national best practice. If you Google financial trend monitoring for municipal governments, from California to Connecticut, ICMA's system evaluating the financial condition for local government, this is the standard. So it's not, if you're wondering, like, are we measuring the correct things in the correct way? Yes to both of those. And these are, again, national best practices. I know that you folks that have been around for a long time know that our documents and our process is held up across the state as an example. The governor uses Northborough and his community compact best practices. They use Northborough as an example. The Suffolk University, the professors there use our financial trend monitoring report as well as our award-winning budget to teach public budgeting classes. And if you serve on a town finance board or committee in the last 7 years, the town of Northborough is who's trained you in best practices in public budgeting. So we enjoy an excellent reputation, but again, we didn't do this and create this on our own. We're following national best practices and programs, so I hope that gives everybody a good sense of reassurance. Why do we engage in this whole trend monitoring process? Well, it's a few things. We want to gain an understanding of the town's financial condition, and it should be objective. So if you ask me, is the town in good shape financially? I'm going to say yes, but of course I'm the manager, so I think we do an excellent job. But as you ask people, are you in good financial shape? That means different things to different people. I have a friend who thinks he's in great financial shape, and I can tell you if I were him, I wouldn't sleep at night. The town of Northborough is in good financial condition, but we want to make sure that we're using objective measures and that we're all speaking in the same language and that we understand what it is we're measuring, why it's important, and that we agree that in fact it is a positive trend or an indicator. As I said earlier, problems don't sneak up on you. Previous years I've given you workshops on how do municipalities get themselves in trouble, right? You expand with your expenses faster than your revenues, you take on too much debt. There are all sorts of things that you can do as a municipal organization that get yourselves in trouble. By measuring these indicators, if you're watching these, you can identify emerging problems or issues before they become critical. And as I always say, it's a straightforward process. I'm showing you as board members and policy board committee members. I'm showing staff. I'm showing members of the public. But we're also showing the credit rating agencies and the folks that we go to when we need to borrow money to build things like libraries and schools and fire stations. And so this is a nice objective analysis to say we're in good shape. As I said before, as board and committee members, some of you are appointed and some of you are elected. And it's natural to have a perspective from where you stand. So if your perspective is I'm on a board or committee appointed for a year or typically 3 years, it's natural for your perspective to be I'm here to get done what I'm interested in getting done over 3 years. It's our job as staff to infuse into those annual budget discussions as well as those 3-year horizons that many of you are looking at, to infuse into that long-run perspectives to make sure that we're not making decisions that are going to cause problems for us down the road. And if they are, to know that we're making decisions that may have repercussions down the road. And again, on an annual basis, it's important to identify any potential issues or opportunities that we might need to have subsequent meetings about to discuss. In years past, we used this as a sounding board to have more detailed discussions about how we're going to deal with our long-range OPEB, other post-employment benefit liabilities. We used it to do a nice in-depth analysis with regard to our infrastructure investments, and we'll talk about those things a little bit later in the presentation. Bottom line, we're trying to predict, avert problems, if we run into a problem to mitigate it, and again, it's that policy discussion afterwards. If we did something that got us into trouble, or we weren't doing something that led to an issue, we want to make sure that we put policies and practices in place so that we prevent it from happening in the future. Probably the best example I can give you of this is during the recession, when we were using a lot of one-time revenues in our operating budget, and then the economy went south, and we weren't bringing in revenues, but now we didn't have that surplus to roll forward. It caused us to make some significant restrictions and reductions in our service level, our level of service delivery. And what we said to ourselves was, we don't want to be in that position again, so we need a free cash policy that we agree on before we get into that predicament again. And I'm happy to say we don't have that problem again, and based on our policies and the actions that we took, we won't find ourselves in that position again. Just a brief word about the difference between fiscal distress and fiscal crisis. Fiscal distress is something that it's common for organizations, particularly public ones, to find themselves in. Fiscal distress can be caused by things like a mold infestation that you weren't planning on. It can be caused by a storm that you weren't anticipating. It can be caused by a sudden downturn in the economy that causes our state aid to get cut in the middle of the year. So these are all things that would cause us distress that we would have to react to. And if we don't react to them appropriately and you bury your head in the sand, if that goes on too long, you'll find yourself in fiscal crisis. And fiscal crisis is when you can no longer pay your bills. When we talked about cash solvency, you can't pay your bills, you're in crisis. You hear, and this happens, there are municipalities that find themselves in receivership or trying to declare bankruptcy basically because they are in fiscal distress. We have never been in fiscal distress here. Fiscal crisis, but we have been in fiscal distress. We have had where the economy takes a downturn, our revenues go down, our state aid gets cut, we've had significant storms or other issues that cause us to have to figure out how we're going to pay for things that were unexpected and unanticipated. But our goal as staff and your goal as policymakers is to make sure that you have the best information possible and the best process possible so that we don't find ourselves making critical decisions about important services in a knee-jerk reaction. You know, we're in trouble. School department, you got to cut $300,000 out of your budget. DPW, we're no longer fixing the roads. We're cutting staff. We're laying off people. Now that can always happen depending on the level of unanticipated issues that you face. But the point here is, if you're tracking your indicators, if you're planning accordingly, the likelihood of you putting yourself in that very difficult position goes down exponentially. And that's the position that we want to have you in. That's the position the staff wants to be in. So that's the kind of lead up to the indicators that we actually are going to review this evening. So what's on the board right now, we refer to this as our dashboard. These are the 14 indicators that we track and we watch not only annually but during the course of the year. And roughly they're separated into revenue indicators, expenditure indicators, there are operating position indicators. In other words, are you running a deficit or a surplus on an annual basis? There's debt indicators, and there are indicators regarding your unfunded liabilities, because these are the things that people don't watch. These are the things that aren't sexy to talk about, and these are the things that people on policy boards and committees that are looking at 1 or 3 year horizons don't necessarily think about these unfunded liabilities for OPEB, for pension. And if you want that school project, or you want that library to be built, or that senior center, or that fire station, and you know that that need exists and you're passionate about that and you advocate for it, that's why you get on a board or committee, that's terrific. But you need to make sure that what you're advocating for has context. You need to make sure that in the long run, we can afford it, not just today, but 10 years from now and 20 years from now. So these indicators measure all those things. The last two are capital. Capital indicators. Are we investing enough money in our equipment, in our infrastructure, in our pavement? Specifically, we've spun out a separate indicator on our pavement because that's one area that we found that we were running into difficult times. So we needed to measure it. We need to come up with a plan and a funding source. And now that we've done those things, later tonight, I'm going to show you how that tracks and how things have actually moved since we've made policy decisions about how we're going to take care of those things. But these are the indicators that we're going to go through tonight. I'm not going to go through them all at the same level of detail. In fact, there's three that we're probably going to spend the lion's share speaking about this evening because these are the ones that are primarily in play. And if you were here last year, you'll know that these were the three that we spent a good amount of time talking about: state aid, economic development growth revenues, and employee benefits, specifically health insurance. These are the things that are going to impact our ability to have the kind of budgets that we want in fiscal 20, but also 21, 22, and 23 moving forward. So the color code, I try to make it easy. Green, green is good. If it's green, it's favorable. If it's red, it's unfavorable. If it's black, it means it's somewhere in the middle. It might be stable or it might be marginal. Maybe it's not to the point where we'd say it's a positive trend or a negative trend. It's too early to call it. But those are sort of in the middle, and it might be uncertain, like employee benefits with health insurance. So if you look at that dashboard, you can see we have a lot of really positive things going in our favor. You know, our property tax revenues, our collection rates, our revenues and expenditures per capita, these are all favorable measures. These are all positive things. The three highlighted ones we're going to talk about, and then a couple of them that show up as negative or as unfavorable are number 9, which is pension liability, and number 10, which is our OPEB, other post-employment liability. Those are both unfavorable. The good news is we have plans in place for both of those and we're tracking them. But it's important to know that they're running unfavorable. And in some instances, we might need to come back and revisit one of those, particularly OPEB, because although we are making significant contributions, we're not making enough. But if you're not going to do something, the most important thing that you need to know as policy boards and committees is what is the expense of not doing something. So if you choose not to replace your equipment, what does that mean? What costs are you kicking down the road? If you choose not to fund that liability, what does that mean for you down the road? And so as you make these decisions, our job is to, again, research these issues, to frame them up, and to make a recommendation. But ultimately, as part of that, is to make sure that you understand the consequences of doing something, and equally, if not more important, of not doing something. So, again, because we have a lot of new faces here, one of our first indicators is property tax. You know, why do we worry about our property tax? Well, 80% of everything that we do, schools, police, fire, DPW, is funded by property taxes. If you have an issue with your property tax base or your collections, you have a real issue and a problem with your ability to be cash solvent and to meet your service demands. I'm happy to say, and again, this is in constant dollars, so controlled for inflation. We have a nice positive trend here in terms of tax growth. Those of you that were at the November 26th tax classification hearing, we spent a lot of time talking about what our tax base looks like, not only in terms of growth, but also its diversity and how robust it is. And so this bears out what we would normally think that we know, and that is that our tax revenues are in good shape. Now, it's one thing to have tax revenues or a good tax base. It's another to actually collect the taxes. Our collection rates run between 98 and 99% on an annual basis. That tells me a couple of things, and it tells you a couple of things. A, we have an excellent treasurer collector who gets the money in an efficient and effective manner. But the other it tells you is that the taxes that we're levying against the businesses and the people in town, it tells you that A, they are able to pay the taxes, and B, they're willing to pay the taxes. Because if they weren't, you'd see default rates and that you see the collection going down. This has never been an issue for us. So for 80% of the base of what we do budgetarily, we're in good shape. We have been in good shape, and I wouldn't see any reason why we wouldn't in the future. If there was a really severe economic downturn, you might see those collection rates dip down. More than likely what you'll see are people filing for abatements. And so this number is net of those abatements. But I have to say, even during, you go back here, 09 and 010, 98.8, 99.16. We're collecting our taxes, which means our cash management is in good shape. This figure is one I do want to spend a moment to talk about. We track our operating revenues and our expenditure revenues per capita. So this is per individual in the town. And so the red line on the top are the revenues, and the blue line on the bottom are our expenditures. Now, I'm happy to report when we started doing this 5 years ago, these lines were inverted. And if those of you that were here remember, I'm going to, Jason's smiling. Jason, you want to tell them why the lines were inverted? What were we doing? What bad practice were we engaged in?
This is going back 10 plus years.
Has to do with free cash.
We were using too much free cash in the operational budget.
We were using one-time revenues, significant $1.4 million, one-time revenues to support our operating budget. And you know what that means. It's like if you have an influx in your own personal life of one-time money and you don't put it towards a one-time expense, instead you use it to elevate your lifestyle, well, what happens next time around? If you don't have that infusion of one-time cash, you're going to be in trouble. So we have had now, since our policy introduction back here, we've had a very positive, consistent gap between those two. And if you think about it roughly think about between the revenue line and the expenditure line, that's your budget surplus. That's your free cash. So at the end of the year, you're ending in a positive position. But here's what I want you to focus on. Look at these last couple data points. What do you see happening here with these two lines? They're starting to converge, okay? Now, they're not going to cross again because you folks are too good to allow something like that to happen, right? We're not going to put ourselves in an inverse position again. But what is happening is budgets are getting tighter. The revenue estimates are getting tighter, and the budgets are getting tighter, which means when we finish the year end, and you all have received a copy of our preliminary free cash plan. I give you a 20-year history of free cash, right? You see for the last several years that our free cash is going down. We know it's going down because the budgets are getting tighter. So what we had going on back here, when you see this gap, this is where the economy starts improving. Well, we're real slow to grow our budgets when we're in a recessionary period, right, and things are getting better, and we see things getting better. We wait, they get better, okay, now we can move our estimates up a little bit next year. They get better, we move, there's a little bit of a lag. We never go, hey, it looks like things are getting better, so let's just raise our revenues way up here and hope we hit those targets. So there's a lag, and when you do that, you tend to finish the year out in a little bit better position. As you come out here now, it's getting tighter. And what I see, based on our management approach and our policies that are in place, again, we're not going to see these lines get inverted, I would hope, barring some major unforeseen surprise. But we're going to see this line's going to start tracking a little closer. If the economy slows down, if we move into a recessionary period, which all indications are that we are headed towards one in the next 12 to 24 months, that you're going to see that get tighter. Now, why is that important for us to know? Well, it's important for us to know because we just talked about free cash, right? My friends to my left over here, the Financial Planning Committee, they're our Capital Planning Committee. We use those revenue surpluses at the end of the year. We don't put them in the operating budget anymore. We use them to invest in capital. Well, it means our capital investment is going to be tighter. So we either cut back or we have to start finding other sources for that capital. Again, it's not a warning. It's not a red flag here, but it's something to take note of. The graph and the data is telling us something. So next year, we'll see where we are. If those lines are really close, it means budgets are very, very tight and it means we might need to start issuing debt for capital improvements again, because since 2012, we have been able to invest over $10 million in pay-as-you-go capital for everything from fire equipment, police cruisers, DPW equipment, to roofs on Peasley School, Proctor School, Lincoln. So that's been a great success story for us. But again, something to watch. So this is one of the highlighted fiscal indicators that I want to spend a little bit of time on, as I tend to each year. This is our state aid, and this is a 31-year trend of state aid. And you can see these these black arrows here. These are recessionary periods. Here's another recessionary period. Here's the last recessionary period. And anybody notice anything? What's the difference between these two and this one? It's the audience participation part of the program. If you don't volunteer, I'll pick somebody randomly. Anybody want to say what's different about this profile from these two? I'll give you a hint. The first two look like a V. The deltas are smaller. These two are V's, right? So here's your recession down, here's your recovery. Down, recovery. Down, pretty straight profile, right? What's the recovery though? Looks like a check mark. It's a very different recovery from the ones that we've seen in the past. And that has implications for us, because it means we're not recovering our revenues from the state back like we would hope to. So if we're getting smaller growth getting back up to where we were, that means that, and I can tell you right now, historically, since the recession, after losing state aid, we have gotten about 1 to 1.5% increase in our state aid during this, the second longest economic recovery in U.S. history. You know what we have to show for it from our friends at the state? 1% a year. Now, if our budgets, if the schools need 3.5 to maintain services, and police and fire, we need 3.5 to maintain service, and the state is giving us 1, well, what does that mean? Where's that being made up? Where's 80% of our budget come from? Taxes. Now, we've been good. We have had some other new revenue sources, the meals and the hotel tax, excellent for us. It's been about $500,000 in new tax revenues for us, new revenues coming in. So that's been that was a great policy decision based on the data. We had a policy decision. We adopted the hotel and meals, local option taxes, and it's been a success story for us. But this is where we are. And by the way, so was it fiscal 16, I think it was? Go all the way back to fiscal 03. So this is in fiscal year 03, we got back to where we were in fiscal 17 in terms of the level. These are nominal dollars, not adjusted for inflation. And I think everybody knows that $5 million in 2003 is worth different than $5 million in 2017. So in nominal dollars, we're back to where we were. When you control for inflation, and so let me just come back to this. So this, when people look at this, what's that look like? If I said, how's that trending? It's left to right going up. It looks like it's trending positively, doesn't it, right? But it's not. And this is why the indicators and how we measure these things is so important. We look at state aid as a percentage of our operating revenue in constant dollars. Constant dollars is controlled for inflation. And when you do that, look at the trend from left to right. It's not going up, is it? It's going down. And if you look back, and I mentioned in 2003, that was the high water mark for state aid. State aid was over 13% of our operating budget. So the state was a real partner in our tax policy, in our approach to taxation for our residents. Well, in fiscal 19, the year that we just started right here, we're down to 8.6. So now you see what sometimes when you look at data, it looks like a positive trend, but when you look at it correctly or you look at it in the right context, it reveals itself. State aid has been a negative trend, a negative indicator for us for years, despite the fact that we've been in the longest economic recovery, the second longest economic recovery in history, right? During that, we've still seen a negative trend. So people try to get their head around, why are budgets still so tight? Why is the town administrator so cheap? Thank you for that. First of all, I view that as a compliment. But why are we so fiscally conservative in what we do? Well, this is why. Because we're looking at the data. We know what it means, and we don't see it getting better. And by the way, this is during the second, as I've said 3 times now, the second longest economic recovery in U.S. history. Anybody have any idea, what do you think is going to happen in the next 2 years? Anybody want to guess? What are you reading in the newspapers? What's the word you're hearing? Recession. You're hearing recession everywhere. Wall Street Journal had an article. 60% of all economists say we're looking at a recession in the next 12 to 18 months, 12 to 24 months. The big debate is not if we're headed to a recession. The debate is whether or not it's going to happen in calendar year 2019 or in calendar year 20. But the one thing that isn't really being debated is whether or not we're headed to some sort of a contraction. And it doesn't need to be this horrible, massive adjustment. It could be. I don't know what it's going to be. If I knew what it was, I wouldn't be here talking to you guys. I'd be my toes in the sand at a beach somewhere because I could play in the market and I'd make millions of dollars. So I don't know how bad it's going to be. I don't know exactly when it's going to hit. But as we look at our fiscal planning for the upcoming year of fiscal 20, that has to be in the back of your mind. And it has to be there because it's going to come at some point. And so is now the time to add 20 new full-time employees with benefits? Probably not. Is now the time to come up with some wild new expansions in the service delivery models that we have? Probably not. Does it mean we can't tweak things, that we can never add staff, or we can't augment the services to match the demands of our residents? No. We can, we should, and we have always been doing that. So state aid is just not looking positive for us. So this is one of the big exposures for us moving forward in fiscal 20. And so December 5th was the annual consensus hearing. This is where the House Ways and Means Committee gets together with the Senate Ways and Means Committee, gets together with the governor's administration, and they bring in the Department of Revenue, they bring in economists, they bring in the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, and they say, tell us what you all see and what your predictions are for the upcoming fiscal year. What they're trying to do is a little bit like what we're trying to do here tonight. We're trying to gain consensus on the information upon which we're going to make decisions moving forward, right? Well, they brought everybody in, and in your handouts I gave you 2. There's 2 handouts. One is a Telegram article. It says, Massachusetts tax growth could slow to 2%, Revenue Commissioner says. The other one is the report from the Mass Taxpayers Foundation. And I love the title on this. It says, are the good times already over? I can tell you this. So I serve on the Mass Municipal Association, which is the association of all municipalities in the state. I serve on the Fiscal Policy Advisory Committee for that. And so we get this data as it comes in, and I get unfiltered reaction from the folks at the state and from the Mass Municipal Association about what they see. And I can tell you the reaction was everybody that presented at this revenue consensus hearing talked about a recession and just about whether or not it was coming in the next 12 months or 24 months. But every single one of them was jittery and talking about how unpredictable revenues are going to be at the state level moving into the next couple of years. So if their revenues are unpredictable, what does that mean for us? It means things are going to be a little bit unpredictable for us to rely on our friends at the state. So here's the other thing to keep in mind. Even when the state revenues were growing at a rather significant rate, 3, 4, 5, 6%, we never saw that in our local aid. During that entire period, our local aid never really bounced, increases bounced above 1.5%. And the reason for that is the state is still trying to recover from the recession. So as they get new revenues in, they're filling the programs and their rainy day fund, their stabilization fund. Those are their priorities, and then they're sharing with us kind of after the fact. And if you be careful now when you see, when the governor releases his budget on January 23rd, I believe, There's going to be a lot of brouhaha about how the state is going to match local aid increases at the same percentage, right? This is one of the victories of the Mass Municipal Association was revenue sharing. Well, what they're talking about isn't all of our state aid. They're talking about one very limited sliver of that. Let's see, what is it, UG or UG? I always forget. It's
unrestricted general government aid.
Thank you very much. Unrestricted general government aid. And so if state revenues go up 3%, our unrestricted general government aid will go up 3%. That sounds like something you should be excited about, right? Anybody want to tell me what that is? Anybody know what that is? Thank you, Jason. Lottery. Those are our lottery revenues. Those are revenues that are supposed to be coming to us legislatively, was proved by the voters for a municipal revenue source. So that's awful big of them to give us what legislatively they're supposed to give us, even though during the last recession and the recession before that, they stole that money and they used it for their own purposes. So that's about 20%. The lion's share of state aid that we get is in the form of Chapter 70, school aid. That is not part of the revenue sharing. If it were, we would be in a much different position in terms of our revenues in state aid. So the one caveat I always remind folks is, now state aid is not unlike some of these other things, these other revenue sources that we look at. You know, we do rolling averages, we might do linear regression analysis, all different techniques to forecast revenues, right? State aid, don't bother. It is not a mathematical exercise, it is a political one. And the one thing, and I'm sorry that Elaine Kelly, the chair of appropriations, isn't here, because this is usually where she lets out a big gasp and they'll give a very short tirade about how the state will always let you down if you count on them. They'll let you down on regional transportation, they'll let you down on the Quinn bill, they'll let you down on lottery, they'll let you down on all sorts of things. And that's okay. The key here is to know that that's the partner that we have and to plan accordingly, which means what? Means you need to be more conservative in what you're doing. You need to make sure that you have reserves and that you're not counting on them to follow through on everything that they might say they're going to do. And by the way, they're not even saying they're going to give you anything. They're going to say, we're going to match your unrestricted general government aid at whatever that level is. So here you go. This is what the consensus, this is everybody talking 2 to 3.2%. The real number where everybody settled on was about 2.4 is what most of these folks that came forward said this is what they expect the revenue growth to be at the state for next fiscal year. Well, if they were at 5 and 6% and we were getting 1, now they're at 2, are they going to bail us out in terms of, you know, this is going to be the white horse that gives us the new revenues to expand whatever programs we want to do? Not likely. It's not likely. And that's okay. The key here is knowing that. If you go in blind and you just say, well, we're just going to assume things are going to get better, then that's naive. And we want to base our plans and our actions on what we know and what we've seen happen in the past. By the way, does anybody know, I want to make sure everybody's aware of this, we're conservative in our estimates. We're usually off on our state aid. You know, they'll come back at the end of the process. So in April, January 23rd, the governor will release his budget. And we'll get our first glimpse based on the revenue consensus hearing of what state aid might do for us. Then in April, the House releases their budget. In May, the Senate releases their budget. And then between June and supposed to be before July, but it doesn't always happen, they're supposed to get together and through a consensus hearing, get agreement on it, then send it to the governor. He vetoes stuff, they override, and then you finally get your budget sometime in July or August. When's our town meeting? April 23rd? So we never know our final state aid before we go to town meeting. So what do? We're conservative in our estimates. And so if we receive more state aid, and when I say we receive more state aid, we might get another $25,000, another $30,000. It's not big money for us, but sometimes it's meaningful, and if it is, once we set our budget, the only thing that additional state aid can be used for is to reduce the tax impact when we set the tax rate in November. So, you know, if anybody's criticized you for being conservative on those estimates, A, they're risky. B, we don't know where we're going to be until way after the fact. And C, if we get any more money, all we can use it for at that point is to reduce the tax impact. When I tell people that, I've never had anybody say, well, I don't like that plan. They say, well, that's reasonable, it's prudent, and it makes me feel comfortable. And it should make you feel all of those things as well. So the next one indicator that I want to spend a little time on is economic growth revenues. So why do we track these? So these are the elastic revenues. These are revenues that move with the general economic conditions. So things like building permits, motor vehicle excise is a big one, hotel and meals taxes, permits. These are things that move with the economy. So why do you want to track something like that? Well, it might be a leading indicator, right? So what's happening? And if you look here, 8.4%, see this little hump in the middle? And then you have this kind of, I wouldn't say it's a decline, but 7.5, 7.2, 7.4, 7.2. It's kind of stabilized. Anybody remember why you think that little hump would be there in the middle? Anybody want to fathom a guess? Don't be shy, speak up. Northborough Crossing. See, you guys do listen. This is great. Northborough Crossing and Avalon Bay, two biggest projects in our history, or recent history. Those are building permits, big $500,000 building permits, gave us a little bump. So you see we're down around here, before and after that. The difference here, though, the thing to keep in mind here is as some of our economic development revenues might drop off, we've backfilled in here beginning in 2005, I believe, 2004, 2005. That's when we brought in the new meals tax and the new hotel tax to sort of broaden our revenue base and to find new revenues that aren't property taxes. So what does this look like to you guys? Is it a good trend? Is it a bad trend? Is it good news, bad news? Is it something we should be worried about? Looks okay. It looks okay. But think of it this way. If a recession does in fact come in the next 12 to 24 months, what are the first things that are going to get hit in terms of our revenue sources? Where are we going to feel it first? Motor vehicle excise. I can drive this old 1997 Toyota Corolla for a couple more years, right? What's the other thing that you cut back on? Well, guess what, guys? We're staying home and we're having spaghetti tonight. We're not going out to 111 Chop House this evening. That's been cut from the home budget. So these are things that happen. So these are leading indicators. But the other thing that happens too is people say, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to remodel that kitchen. I'm going to hold off. Maybe I'm not going to put that deck on. So building permits and building activity slows. On the bigger scale, although we pick up a lot of new growth value on your kitchens and your additions and your decks, if bigger projects like the ones that are occurring down on Bartlett Street right now, or the mall, Avalon Bay, if those don't move forward, you lose the building permits. But more concerning to us is you lose that new growth. That tax base is not growing. That's not a new source of new revenue for us to operate on. So we want to watch these very carefully. And as everybody talks about recession and these are concerns, when we do our budgets, we're conservative when we look at now motor vehicle, we're estimating what we think we're going to get for building permits and local receipts and those things. We want to be conservative on those. And by the way, the fiscal year 18 that we just closed, right? We hit our revenues within 1.3%, 1.39, and our expenditures came back at about 1.5. So in other words, in terms of targets, we were within the thresholds, we were about a 1.5%. I can tell you this, if you cut it any tighter than that, it's just sheer dumb luck. Because one big building permit can push those revenues up by 1%, okay? And that's as good as it gets. And we hover around that pretty consistently. At your next meeting, not the December 17th meeting, but the one after, Bill Frere, the auditor, will come in, and one of the things that he said, he always compliments the town on is that our free cash, our thresholds of our budget to actual for revenues and expenditures are about as good as we can get. That means we plan well, we execute well, and we just need to be careful. Because when you keep things tight, remember the two graphs, or the per capita, they're good at doing this. When they're tight, that gap closes very quickly. One big issue, one big concern for us when we talk about those economic revenue sources, and this graph should look familiar, particularly for members of the board. I like to use the same data and the same information between the budget, the hearings, and our annual reports. So you get used to seeing it in the same context. But this is our new growth. This is new development. Here you have Avalon Bay. This is the mustard. That's residential. Here's the lighter colored, I don't know, yellowy here. This is Northborough Crossing. This little bump right here, that's the second phase of the mall where all the restaurants went in, right? But look, we're never going to see this again, guys. This is historic levels. We're never going to see that again. But we're seeing a new norm of around $30 million. And frankly, as we look forward several years, I think it's going to be hard. We're going to be hard pressed to hit $30 million of new growth. In fiscal 20, we got a couple positive things going on right now in terms of economic development. You'll hear me talk about, well, you know, these things happen in cycles, right? You'll get a lot of development. A lot of it's built on spec. It gets absorbed. It gets rented. It gets leased. And then the demand builds up. Somebody will build more space. That gets absorbed. It gets leased, and we move on, right? So right now, our economic development is really planned out in two areas. The southwest and the southeast, you have where Wegmans is in the mall, right? That was our big vacant land to be developed for future economic development. That's largely developed right now. There's 2 pads left out there next to the baseball fields. Now, the other site you heard me talk about recently is last year, 100 contiguous acres off of Bartlett Street, the Coderre company. Well, the Coderre company right now has about 980,000 square feet either in construction or in the pipeline. So that 100 acres is being built right now. So we're going to see, I believe we'll see reasonable, it'll be probably north of $30 million, but it's not going to be this. It's not that kind of construction. It's largely transportation hub construction. So we're going to see reasonably good new growth in fiscal 20. What about 21 and 22? 23 for that matter. We have to come to terms with where we are as a community in terms of our growth. Are we a startup company? Are we growing quickly? Are we a mature company? You know, are we sustaining? Are we old? Are we in decline? I would argue that we, and as a manager, you know, one of the things you're supposed to do is assess your, right? You're supposed to assess your organization. Where are you? Because you plan accordingly. Well, we've been a growth company for a while, right? The mall, Avalon Bay, this last bit here. Well, when you start running out of the raw materials for expansion and new growth like this, you need to start coming to terms with the fact that we are approaching build-out as a community. We're not going to see a $750 million project come in. That 100 acres is between now and next year going to be built on. The mall is the mall. We have Kimball's down the street from the mall is Kimball Sand and Gravel. It's 50 acres. 50 acres of land. It's prime real estate. It's ready to be developed. So that will happen at some point. When that happens, though, we're going to need that development to hit our $30 million in new growth mark. It's not going to be scaling up. So if one of the things I'm trying to do tonight is I'm trying to plant in your minds and to get you folks to start thinking about the fact that, you know, we've had great growth. We have excellent, and by the way, this economic development that we had, it's not fleeting. It's here and it's staying. Of our top 15 taxpayers, 9 of them have either located in Northborough or expanded their operations in the last 10 years. And it's diverse. it's biotech, it's R&D, it's retail, it's nursing homes, it's medical. That's what I want for a tax base, diverse tax base. We're not going to be beholden to 3M packing up and leaving, or AstraZeneca packs up and you get this massive hole. We're diverse, we're solid, it's here. The thing to keep in mind is the growth rate is not going to be here in the future. Now the good news is our level of services right now is pretty good. Our schools aren't busting out at the seams. Enrollment's declining a little bit. We're able to manage what we have. Police and fire, we've added police officers, we've added firefighters, we've added folks back to DPW. Our expenses are matching the level of services now, so we need to start thinking about ourselves as a maturing organization and a sustaining organization. So that's just something to keep in mind as we kind of look forward. That you know what? Think of it this way. When Avalon Bay went in right here, right? That's 382 units. That's people, that's children, that's motor vehicle excise. That was one of my favorite aspects of it. It's tax dollars, it's service demands, right? Last year, you know how many houses went in? Anybody remember from tax classification? 11. Who said 11? Very good. You get Scott. Excellent. This is the new guy too. He was paying attention. 11. A big subdivision for us these days is 4 or 5 houses, if that. What we see more often than not are small pork chop lots, people with a big lot dividing it up because they're getting ready to retire, things of that nature. But we're not seeing big developments, big tracts. So housing is built out. The commercial, it's not completely built out, but it's there. We'll see redevelopment, you know, as the real estate continues to appreciate. You'll see redevelopment of, you know, down Route 20, up and down Route 20. Some of these older structures will get flipped over and we'll get some new growth there. But this is the mindset I want you to start thinking about as our organization. We're becoming a mature organization. And that means our level of services right now, our goal, one of our goals should be that we want to maintain this high quality level of services that we have, but be careful that we don't want to stretch ourselves in a manner that we might not be able to sustain. So big expansions. That's why when we did, you know, 2 prior chiefs, both police and fire, both wanted 10 more guys each. And we said, we don't think we can sustain it based on the contextual information and the information we have. We did add 3, 4 positions in fire and a couple in police. And based on agreement, that's a good level of service where we need to be. But had we just made a policy decision without this information, we would not be able to sustain the requested level any more than if the school committee decided, you know what, kids learn better in smaller environments. A class size of 10 is better than a class size of 20. Yeah, that may be the case, but we're not going to be able to sustain that. You need to keep that in the back of your mind. One-time revenues, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this other than to just remind you, we got out of the practice of those one-time revenues in the operating budget. So this is basically our free cash levels, right? The red is the money that instead of going into the next operating budget and inflating our overall budget costs, that's going to one-time capital. And as I said, $10.5 million since fiscal 12. That's phenomenal. Because every time you pay for capital out of one-time revenues, it means you're not adding debt service, which isn't coming back to hit you operational. It's just the same thing as in your private life. You're not charging the credit card. You stop charging the credit card, you pay it off, and then you pay cash. We started doing that in 2012. And that has made us a very, very strong, it's a very strong aspect of our positive financial condition. So let's talk about personnel, because this is one that I do want to spend a couple of minutes on. So this particular indicator is personnel, wages, benefits as a percentage of your operating revenues. So when you look at benefits, pay, retirement assessments, all that stuff together, for us, it's about 75% of our budget is for personnel, wages, and benefits. So one of the things you want to watch is that escalating. Is it escalating because you're hiring more staff quickly or you're growing quickly? You can see here, look at this. It's virtually flat. It's been 75% going all the way back to 2009. Now, we've added staff. In some cases, staff has come and gone, but we've added staff. But it's been consistent. It's been at a level that we can absorb and we can sustain. And so this is a favorable indicator. It's stable. It's stable. We have not seen anything running away here in terms of 75% of your budget, if it's for your personnel, if that grows, it's 80 and then it's 85. What does that mean? What's it crowding out? I don't know, probably things like equipment. It's probably crowding out, fixing your roads. It's crowding out other things. Not the case for us. However, we do have, if you drill down into that a little bit closer, indicator number 8, this is your employee benefits as a percentage of your wages and salaries. So this is one that we're watching. See this little green cap on the top of these? That's where we started putting money aside for our unfunded liability for OPEB. But this blue, these are our benefits, health insurance, 19, 20, 20.5, 21.9. So we're seeing in the health insurance side, we've done an excellent job as an organization managing our health insurance costs. And we're going to talk about that in a little detail. But when you look here, this is the thing that keeps me up at night. Health insurance costs. Of all the things that we have in motion in our budget, including state aid, the thing that you should be worried and asking questions about and tracking the most is health insurance. In one cycle, health insurance can blow our entire budget out of the water. So let's talk about what it looks like. So this top of the graph right here, this is what we were facing back 2007, 2009. 9, 10, 11% increases in health insurance. This is where things were trending. Now in 2010, we got together because we couldn't sustain that. We got together with all of the employees and we negotiated plan design changes. Everybody on the school side, everybody on the town side came together, agreed to make significant changes. We adopted Section 18, moved our retirees out of our active plans onto Medicare. And look what the increase was here, moving forward. We had several good years. In 2012, the teachers increased their contributions to health insurance by 5%. That kept things reasonable that year. Move forward a few more years. And then we get down, things started to pick up. We had a couple of good years. 2017, things got ugly again. We were looking at significant increases. Went back to all the employees, negotiated plan design. By the way, everybody does realize that if the health insurance comes in at some outrageous number, we can't just arbitrarily change the plan designs or make any altercations to what we provide to the employees. It has to be bargained. That is a very extremely labor-intensive process. That means getting all unions on the school side and the town side, the two administrations together, and coming up with something that we can all agree on. Now, we've been able to do that historically for this whole period of time. We've been able to make the necessary changes. It hasn't had to go to the Board of Selectmen to invoke the health insurance legislation where you can railroad plan design changes. However, you have to share some of the savings of that. We've never gone that formal, difficult route. We've always been able to, as employees and as an organization, take care of this problem. In 17, we made plan design changes. 18 and 19 were the two worst years for health insurance of the 10 years that I've been the town administrator here. These were absolutely brutal. So we made plan design changes. We still saw an 8.3% budget increase in fiscal 18, even with plan design changes. When we came around in 19, so this is the fiscal year that we're in right now, fiscal 19. We came around in 19, we were looking at 12 to 15% increases in health insurance. Now, the market trend was 7 to 8%, 7 to 9% market increase. What killed us was our loss ratios. Our claims were 100%, in some cases in excess of 100%. So the market was moving at a difficult pace, but our personal experience was such that we were getting killed. So we got back together with the employees. What can we do? We put an RFP out. We consolidated our plans from 4 carriers to 1 carrier, and we got that increase down to a 3.8%. All but 1 union agreed to that without any concessions, without any consideration. All employees, including the ones in the union that didn't want to agree to this, they're all better off. None of them are worse off economically. It was absolutely the right decision for us to make, and the only thing for us to do. So we went out to bid. We have 1 carrier. It was about as smooth of a transition. Everybody has Fallon now. Now, one of the benefits of that move, other than getting a 15% increase down to a 3.8, one of the benefits is now we had all of our experience spread out over different carriers, and we couldn't get experience rated. If you have less than 100 people in a plan, they won't tell you what the claim, they don't consider the claims data to be valid. So you don't even know how you're trending. Now that we have everybody in one spot, we can see what our actual claims data looks like. And right now, as we lead into fiscal 20, it looks pretty darn good. And I'm cautiously optimistic. We don't have a renewal yet, but I'm cautiously optimistic that in fiscal 20, we're going to have a reasonable increase that we don't need to negotiate or do anything, and it's not going to put us in crisis. So we don't have that information yet. It's too premature for me to share with you, other than so far it looks like it's good news. But here's what I want you to keep in mind. 17, 18, 19. 3 consecutive years, the superintendent and I had to sit down with every single bargaining unit with all these employees and negotiate plan design changes. That's exhausting for us. It's exhausting for the employees as well. But that is the situation that we're in. And if we didn't do it, we would be in fiscal distress, potentially leading to fiscal crisis. But we certainly would be in fiscal distress. But here, I'll put this fiscal 10 to fiscal 18, the average budgetary increase for health insurance for the town and the K-8 employees, 3.21%. I'll put that up against anybody. But it didn't happen by elfin magic. It happened by amazing cooperation between the school administration and my office, and it happened with amazing cooperation between the employees and the administration. Everybody had to come to the table in good faith to make that happen. Why do I get so obsessed about health insurance? Why do I stay awake at night? Why should it be the #1 thing that you, as policy boards and committees, should be worried about? I'll show you why. When health insurance is fine and the renewals are reasonable, the schools can have what they need to do what they do, police and fire can have what they need, and DPW can have what they need to do what they do. When we look at a 10% increase in a $5.73 million budget, it's $573,000. We typically are increasing our operating budgets to sustain services. We need about 3.5%. So 3.5%, $757,000. So basically, if I get a 10% increase in our health insurance, that means 75% of all new revenue that I have to work with to do everything that you folks want us to do goes to health insurance. And once it goes into that pot, it never comes back. If health insurance is reasonable, our budgets are okay. If health insurance is out of control or excessive, no budget is safe and no employee is safe. It's that important and it's that critical. And we explain this to our employees. We give them good data, we give them good information, and we communicate incessantly. Honestly, 3 years in a row, I don't think I have talked about anything other than health insurance, it seems like. We're negotiating health insurance 6 to 9 months out of the year, every year. Why? It's so critical to our survival as an organization. And by the way, this isn't unique to Northborough. This is everybody's in this boat. If health insurance goes crazy, they get crazy increases, it has implications for absolutely every aspect of their municipal operation. We've been lucky. We've been lucky. We've had I've had an excellent partner on the school side to work with, who has a good relationship with her employees. We have an excellent relationship with our unions, and our unions have come to the table in good faith. That's why we're okay. But I will tell you, there is this fatigue factor. And I really, honestly, it didn't matter what this insurance increase was in fiscal 20. Superintendent and I agreed, we're not negotiating health insurance again if there's any way to avoid it. I believe now that we have all of our people in one spot and we can track meaningful data, we have We have the data now to argue with the carrier for why we shouldn't see a 10% increase. Because now I can see if our loss ratios are running really well, then they shouldn't be coming at us with a 10% increase. And right now our loss ratios are running very well, and I hope that in fiscal 20 we'll be in good shape. Why am I going on and on about something that I just told you in fiscal 20 is in good shape? Because in fiscal 21, what can happen? That can happen. And I can go through 14 indicators here tonight and tell you, in my opinion, how the town of Northborough is in good financial condition and well managed and well positioned. And then in one cycle, in one line item, we're in fiscal distress. You need to always have that in the back of your mind. And that's why when I talk to you about health insurance incessantly, this is why. It's that critical to our operation. Moving forward in fiscal 20, I think we're going to get a good year. We're going to be okay. If something happens in fiscal 2021, we're all going to be back at it again. Superintendent's smiling because she's retiring at the end of the fiscal year. It won't be her problem. But the rest of us will all still be here. Pension liability. Pension liability is unfavorable. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this for one simple reason. It's unfavorable in terms of the percentage funded, but it's on a funding plan. There's nothing more to be done. The town is on a plan, and by the way, we're part of the Worcester Regional Retirement System. This isn't our decision. We don't manage this. It's managed separately from us. And the thing you want to know is that we have to, by law, be fully funded by 2040. The Worcester Regional Retirement System is on a funding plan right now to be fully funded by 2035. What it means, what you do want to take away from this is, if we're going to be fully funded by 2035, what's going to happen to our assessment? It's not trending at the rate of my revenue increases from the state, I can tell you that. It's probably going to be trending around 8.5%, something in that neighborhood. So again, it's something we can manage, and we need to plan for it. But as far as you as policy-making boards and committees, you need to know this information, but you don't need to act upon it or vote on it or make any decisions about it. It's already on a funding plan. One that you do have to look at, and is ugly, is our other post-employment benefits. This is basically health insurance for retirees, our obligations for those folks. The number is astronomical, $47 million. But you come down here, net right now is at 44.8 because, remember I spoke a little while ago, we made a policy decision to find some revenues. We adopted the hotel and meals tax. It's about $500,000. We use that money to put towards our unfunded liability. This is how, rather than raise taxes or cut services, we identified new revenue source and we dedicated those revenues towards funding our OPEB liability. So these numbers are ugly. They're going to continue to be ugly. But the line I'll draw your attention to is this yellow line, which is the funded ratio. It was always 0 because we weren't putting any money aside for this unfunded liability. If you're reading the papers, this over the last 5 years has probably been the single biggest financial issue that has been discussed at the state level and across the municipal association. Because what happened was GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB, forced us to start measuring and reporting our OPEB liability on our financial statements so that when people want to buy our bonds and when Moody's or Standard & Poor's wants to rate our creditworthiness, that liability is quantified and shown. Well, guess what? They didn't show it so that we can just go, ooh, that's an ugly number. Thanks for letting us know. No, they want you to take action on that. Now, Northborough has done that. We put $500,000 aside into our OPEB liability. We started doing that in fiscal 15 right here. And I'm happy to say that as of September 30th of 2018, we have $3 million in our trust fund. This is a non-revocable trust fund. So don't get anybody get excited that, oh, I get into trouble. You can take, no, it's non-revocable. That money goes in, it doesn't come back out. It's only for this purpose. So we're only a handful of communities across the state that are making meaningful contributions. Is it enough? No. It should probably be 3 times that on an annual basis. Do I have another $1 million to throw at this? No. But we should be talking about how do we increase that $500,000 even by $50,000 or $100,000 a year. That's something we need to be doing. Unfortunately, our revenues haven't grown. If my only revenue source is raising people's taxes, there's a hesitancy to do that, right? State aid isn't growing. Our local receipts have grown, but not tremendously. It's helped backfill the lag of state aid. This is one that you're going to continue to hear about. You need to know about it, and you need to ask about it, and we need to revisit it on an annual basis. I'd like to see if in fiscal 20 we couldn't increase it by $50,000. Is that going to make it go away? No, but everything matters. It's no different than you hear people talk about, you meet with a financial planner and you say, I'm 30 years old, I haven't put any money aside for retirement. What should I do? And they say, well, this is what you should put aside. Well, I can't afford that. What's the next thing they say? Well, what can you afford? And what do they stress to you? Start putting what you can put aside as early as you can and as much as you can. That's the moral of the story for OPEB. So we need to start putting aside as much as we can, as early as we can. And we have made, this is not, most towns have put $15,000 or $20,000 in one time. They might take some free cash and put it in there one time. As part of our base budget, we're putting $500,000 every single year into that fund. And we're not blazing a trail here, but that funding ratio of 0, 1.4, 2.8, 4.4, our funding ratio is at 5% now. So it is improving. This is where I'm trying to get what we can out of this. It's unfavorable. There's no question about it. But it is improving. Because if we don't do that, these numbers grow even faster, and that trend looks uglier. So for the issue that it is, I think we've taken very real, meaningful policy steps towards addressing it. Jason, you had a question?
I was just going to ask, could you comment on what the real long-term solution to this problem would be?
Sure. The real long-term solution to this problem is to put more money in this fund, which means that money has to come from either new revenues or reduced budgets. So in lieu of growing a budget, you would put the money there, or you identify some new revenues. I did at one time have some new revenues identified, a potential marijuana grow facility, but we've chosen not to go down that path. Honestly, that's what some towns have done. They said, well, we'll take a grow facility. We don't want a dispensary, but we'll take a grow facility, and under the host agreement, we'll get $150,000 a year, and we'll put it in OPEB. That's creative.
An opportunity after 2035, when the pension is fully funded, those funds that are currently in the budget to fund the pension liability can be diverted into OPEB liability for a long term.
And that is baked into these numbers because we've told the actuaries that that is our intention, that once pension is funded, we'll slide it over. But that's 2035. So I hope we'll be funded by then. The plan is to be funded by then, but it is what it is. But Jason, the very simple answer is there's no magic here. You either find new revenues or you take it out of your operating budgets. Our operating budgets are pretty tight, though. We're not growing. Our operating budgets are level service budgets. And that doesn't mean the number doesn't change. It means it grows enough to give reasonable wage increases and to do the things that we need to do to meet the service demands that we have. It's like I said earlier, when that service level solvency, we're not just going to not hire new police officers as we grow, or new firefighters, or new teachers. If the demands are up, you have to be able to address those. So, but again, what would your financial advisor tell you? Okay, what can you do? Can you squeeze out $50,000 and put it in there? I'd like to see us try to do that. Debt service. Our debt policy is that our debt service as a percentage of the general fund expenditures should be between 5 and 10%. Our debt service right now is around 5%. We're in excellent, excellent debt position. And you know why this chart is important as an indicator? Is because when we want to do, say, a Lincoln Street building project for $25 million, or a fire station, or a library, or a senior center, one of the things that people ask you as policy boards and committees is, can we afford this? Now, I want to make a very clear distinction. When we say, can we afford something, I'm not asking you, Leslie Rutan, if you can afford the increase in taxes. I'm asking you, Town of Northborough, as a corporate entity, can you afford this project? And so just like in your personal lives, you have a certain level of debt that you want to stay under. For us, the industry standard is 5 to 10%. I'm at 5%, okay? Now, some people may say, well, you know, the real ideal place you want to be is not to carry any debt. That's not realistic. Just for you as individuals, very few people can pay cash for a house, car, or an education, right? There are some things you finance. There's some things you're not supposed to finance, like, you know, vacation trips to Disney World and a few other things like that, right? So at the municipal corporate level, for us, it makes sense for us to finance this library over 20 years. Why? You might live here, right, for 10 years. Those 10 years that you live here, you pay your fair share of this library in the form of debt service. There's an intergenerational equity issue to be made for why you finance these large projects. From a practical standpoint, I can't come up with $25 million out of my operating budget to build a Lincoln Street school. It's not realistic, right? But the good news is, so Lincoln Street School, 14.2 or 14.8? $14.2 million in debt, our share. It was a $25 million project. We got a $10 million grant roughly. So 16 and 17, look what our debt did. It went up. See, we're always paying debt down, right? But it went up. That's Lincoln Street. It didn't skyrocket to 10 or 12 or 15%. So then we're paying it down. We'll continue to pay it down. The fire station projects will come in. You're going to see this number jump up maybe a percentage point. So when I ask you, can the town of Northborough afford to build a new fire station? What's the answer? As a corporate entity, yes, we can. Yes, we can. Now, as an individual, if Leslie Rutan, you can't afford it, well, then we do have programs. If you truly cannot afford it, we have abatement and exemption programs that you can apply for based on need or age or disability. And that's to be distinguished between Leslie Rutan can't afford it versus Leslie Rutan isn't in favor and that's not where she would like to spend her money. That is a perfectly legitimate stance to take and position to take, and you should feel comfortable saying something like that at town meeting. But what we try to do is we try to eliminate the false reasons for not doing things, like, oh, I don't have enough information, there hasn't been enough process, and we can't afford it. By giving you measures that prove as a corporate entity, we can't afford it. Not only can we afford it, but we need to do it. Now think about this in your personal life, all right? If I want to save money, that's easy. I don't bring the guy in to maintain my furnace this year. I don't paint the house. I don't put any money aside for, you know, fixing the roof. I don't do a tune-up on my car. Look at all the money I just saved, right? Excellent, right? How long did I save that money for? Until the car breaks down, until the furnace stops working, and then you have to replace it because you didn't maintain it. On a larger scale, that's what we're talking about here. We need to, as a corporate entity, invest in our capital, our infrastructure, in our equipment. And if we don't, in a way, it's an unfunded liability. It's a structural deficit that will come back and will cost us twice as much money in the future. No place is that more evident and blazing than DPW and road maintenance. We can maintain, if I give Scott $1, he can maintain 3 yards of pavement through crack sealing. If I don't give him that $1 and I wait until the road needs to be replaced, that same section of road will cost us $25 to $30. So you have to issue debt. You have to make sure that it's a reasonable level and for the right reasons. We hit all those check boxes. So when we talk about the fire station, you're going to see a chart like this at town meeting, and we're going to explain the difference between what somebody wants to spend money on versus what we as an entity can afford to do. Financial reserves. If you read the articles that I gave you, both the mass taxpayers and the Department of Revenue, the Commissioner of Revenue's comments, you know what they both are talking about? Rainy day funds. If you think a recession is around the corner, what do you want to do? You want to make sure that you have appropriate reserves to manage through that recession. You don't know how bad it's going to be, you don't know how deep it's going to cut, and you don't know how long it's going to go. And everyone is a little bit different. So you want to make sure you have financial reserves. When we do go out to bond for that fire station, and the bond rating agencies come in and they review our financials, they're going to assess our financial condition, the very thing that you're doing tonight through this exercise. And one of the things they look at is if the state aid gets cut mid-year, if there is a recession, Does the town have the resources to continue making its bond payments? Are you creditworthy? So reserves are a big part of that. Right now, our reserves are about 8.8%. Our policy is to keep them between 5 and 10. I'll tell you this, the bond rating agencies want to see our reserves giving our socioeconomic demographics closer to 10%. They want to see us around 8 to 10%. As part of the Lincoln Street building project, our bond rating was upgraded from a AA2 to a AA1, the highest bond rating ever achieved by this town. So our goal is not just to get there, but our goal is to sustain that and stay there so that when we go back out in the market for the fire station project, we're going to get excellent interest rating. It's no different. If your credit worthiness isn't good, when you go to mortgage a house or buy a car, they're going to charge you more interest because you're a riskier investment. It's the exact same principle, but on a larger scale for us. And a big component is making sure reserves are healthy. I got 2 more to go through before we shift gears, but fixed assets. This, it looks like, somebody mentioned, it looks in our planning process, this looks like a stick of Tutti Frutti gum. Remember that gum with the giraffe on it? The blue is land improvements, the red's construction, the green is building improvements, the purple is equipment, this blue up here is infrastructure, and the top is business type infrastructure, water and sewer. This is nominal dollars. This is just money that we're putting into all of those capital investments. And so when you look at this, it looks like a positive trend. What we want to know is when we control for inflation, and more importantly, depreciation, does it still look good? I'll tell you it does. So that profile is still the same. Anybody want to tell me what this big jump here from 15 to 16? We added something significant of value. What was it? I'm looking over here. Did we do something to one of your schools? Lincoln Street School. Very good, Kelly. Lincoln Street School, $25 million investment. That's a big jump right here. So we know overall when you control for inflation, we are making this line is steady or improving a little bit, right? If this overall profile was going down, it would mean that we're not making an appropriate amount of investments in those capital assets. What I want you to look at right now, look at this blue line here, okay, right? The difference between the overall profile, this is control for inflation. This blue line right here is depreciation. You all know when you buy a car, 5 years from now, you pay 25 grand for it. 5 years from now, it's not worth 25 grand anymore, is it? It depreciates. So do police vehicles, fire apparatus, roadways, they all depreciate. So we actually look at, when you account for a depreciation, where are we? It's still a nice level line. That means we're making solid, regular, steady investments in our capital, in our buildings, in our infrastructure. That's where we want to be. One area that we specifically drilled down in, we had long policy discussions about, was our pavement management. Despite the fact that our capital asset investment, our buildings was good, our equipment was good, infrastructure, water and sewer was decent, we weren't putting enough money in our roadways. This chart right here shows, we updated this. This chart right here shows we've got several years where we put $1.1 million into our roadways. If we continue to do that, we'll be on this trend right here. So pavement, we changed vendors. It was always pavement condition index, and Scott's driving me crazy because now they call it, what is it? Road service rating. Basically, on a scale of 1 to 100, 100's perfect, 0 is you're walking on dirt. Our roads overall were 71 in 2014. And if we didn't start putting more money in, overall, the majority of our roads would be in a failed condition. And we'd be spending 10 to 20 times as much to get back to where we were. This is a success story for you folks. Because we studied the issue, we framed it, we gave you 3 alternatives. We told you, if you choose not to put money towards roads, this is what's going to happen. If you chose to put a minimum, to stem the bleeding, 1.1, we're on an upward trajectory. So our current index is at 73.4. So if we stay on this track over the years, we'll continue to slowly improve. Just like OPEB, ideally, I'd like to be between the blue and the yellow line. I'd like to see our roadways improve. But at a minimum, we cannot be between the blue line and the red line. So this is a perfect example of a policy discussion that we have and an indicator that we funded and now we track. and now we are making positive progress. So wrapping up on this, you can see now these are all the indicators we went through. The ones that are favorable, favorable, uncertain, stable, the ones that we can affect, the ones that we can't affect, the ones that we need to watch, and the ones that we need to contingency plan for, like state aid and potential recession. So overall, the current financial condition of Northborough, I would characterize it as good financial condition. And again, this is with a very big caveat. We're in good financial condition. What's the one thing that can change that overnight? Health insurance. Health insurance. Our tax base is strong, very diversified. Our reserves are healthy, exactly where the bond rating agencies want to see us. Our debt rating is the highest it's ever been. Our reliance on one-time revenues is 1%. So exposure there is very low. And we continue, again, $10.5 million in pay-as-you-go capital. Potential emerging, so that's the good news. So now what are the potential emerging problems or things that we should be worried about? Well, long-run solvency, pension liability, OPEB. We need to be tracking those, make sure that we're investing. We have a lot of uncertainty surrounding state aid. We talked about that at great length. We have a lot of uncertainty regarding health insurance. I don't think it's going to be an issue. I don't think those two items are going to be a critical issue in fiscal 20 to the point where we need to reconvene all of you folks to say something has materially changed and we need to do something different budgetarily. But they are certainly uncertain and we need to watch them. New growth, I think we're going to be okay for new growth based on the buildings that are occurring out on Bartlett Street right now. Almost 1 million square feet of new development is going to help us out in fiscal 20 and 21. Beyond that, we need to be watching that. That's something to be concerned about. And the last but not least, we are going to be looking at a recessionary period at some point in the next couple of years. It's just a matter of exactly when, how hard it hits you, and how deep it hits you. I don't know the answers to those questions, but I know I have reserves, and I know that I'm very conservatively building the fiscal 20 budget to plan for that potential recession. So in terms of our fiscal 20 budget, overall, a couple of things to keep in mind. We need to keep making at least the minimum investment of $500,000 in OPEB. I'd like to see that go up a little bit if we can. A big thing for us right now, all 5 unions on the town side, all 5 unions, their contracts expire at the end of this fiscal year. So we're in negotiation with police, fire, and dispatchers and the Municipal Employees Association. We need to make sure that what we negotiate in those contracts is something that we can live with, not just for the next 3 years, but as we look out. We need to make sure that we keep investing in our pavement management, as I talked about. And last but not least on this, when we put budgets together, the superintendent and I come to our respective boards and committees, we're not giving you any gimmicks. We're not putting one-time revenues in. We're not pitching off costs to subsequent years. We're not forgoing making investments in our unfunded liabilities. We're not skipping investing in our equipment and our infrastructure. Our foundation for our budget and everything that we do as an organization is solid. And we need to make sure that we continue making it and continue it being solid. So we have comprehensive financial policies. Everything that we propose to you is in compliance with those policies. Our debt ratios, our free cash policies, our investment policies are all in conformance. So I know it's been a lot of information, guys, and it's a little, I went through in a little bit more detail than I did last year because we have so many new people. And I think it's important that people get this information at your level in the organization because you have to understand this context because you're the ones that are going to get the citizens calling you up and saying, I'd like all-day kindergarten. I'd like more parkland. I'd like more police. I'd like more fire. I always joke, nobody ever calls up and says, can we get more DPW guys? You know, can we get, you know, nobody cares about DPW. But people want more services, and that's natural. Your job is in this context to understand what we can do and how quickly we can do it because you know that if you can't sustain it we probably ought not to be doing it. And as we look out, that ability to sustain is going to get a little bit tighter in the next couple of years. Does anybody have any questions about any of the indicators that I covered? I only have a few slides now that I'd like to go through. That's the perspective back. So we look back 10 years. Now we're going to look forward 5 years with some projections and some assumptions. It's in that context that we're going to build our fiscal 20 budget. So I'm starting to see eyes glaze over a little bit now. You guys want to take a quick break, or do you want to just plow through? Plow through. That's the spirit. I can see now I'm going to have to start asking more questions to make sure people are awake and paying attention. Look, I love this stuff, and I hope it's evident that I love this stuff, and honestly, I hope it rubs off on you guys that you love this, because I can tell you right now that you get better information than 90 to 95% of the people that are sitting in your position in other communities. And I know that for a fact because I'm out training a lot of those people and those boards and committees, and they crave this information because you're being asked to go to town meeting and make a recommendation about a building project or a budget, okay? It's not just I support the schools or I support the fire department or I support the library, so I'm going to recommend we vote for this stuff. Hopefully you do support them, but you need to know that you can recommend this in a way that's going to maintain the financial stability and the financial condition of the town. And if you don't have this information, then what you have are good intentions. And what's the saying about good intentions? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's true. Well-meaning people on boards and committees think they're doing the right thing, and they dig a hole for the organization. Why? Because they don't have good information. My job is to make sure you have that information. My job is also to make sure that we have the process, of which this meeting is the second most critical meeting as part of that process, to make sure you know this and you have time to ask questions. All right, shifting gears quickly now, we're going to move and start looking forward at financial projections. So we're going to talk about 5-year projections. We'll go over the assumptions. We'll talk about the future tax impact, which is going to be of significant interest to you folks. And then just overall, what do we see for our financial outlook? So when it comes to our financial projections, unlike many communities, we aren't up against the wall. We have not taxed to the max under Prop 2.5. So we are not at our limits of our levy capacity. We have some levy capacity left. So that means when we do our projections, it's not what do we want to spend and what our revenues look like, and are we to the black or in the red. Ours is a little more complicated because we have to kind of back into things. So we use a revenue-driven model. And basically, we know we're going to stay within the limits of Prop 2.5. We use fiscal 19 as the base year, and we look out 5 years. And we tend to focus on the main things that are in motion. So the top 3 revenues, taxes, state aid, and motor vehicle excise are the things that we really concentrate on. It's funny, you look at that slide, state aid 10%. What's state aid right now? It's 8.6%, right? I need to update that slide. That's what's happened in the last couple of years since we've been tracking this stuff. The minimum goal here is we want to protect it in the current level of services, and we want to make sure that we're able to continue those services into the foreseeable future. So the assumptions that we're using in terms of our financial projections are that we will see new growth of $30 million in value, and that adds a little over $500,000 in new tax revenues. So new growth, remember the chart I showed you, new growth, that last 3 or 4 years, we're at about, in fiscal 19, we had $36 million in new growth. So that's not an unreasonable level. State aid, as we talked about, we're assuming a 1%. Anybody want to argue for higher than 1% state aid in our assumptions? Anybody? It was 1.03% in fiscal 19. And state aid and state revenues were actually pretty healthy. Motor vehicle excise and local receipts, we're level funding those. We increased motor vehicle excise and meals tax last year by $300,000. So we elevated those last year. Now we got to sit tight on those for a little bit. It's not time to push those. As we indicated, those are the first things to go down in the event of a recession. Again, as everything that I've said tonight, there's no one-time gimmicks. We're going to maintain our reserves, and we're going to continue to make investments in our capital, our equipment, and our buildings. We're also going to continue to fund, these are the assumptions of this model. We're going to continue to fund OPEB at least at this is $550,000. That's what we're hoping to do in the model, 550. It remains to be seen if we can get there. Benefit costs, health insurance. Again, this is where you have to be careful. You know, I love when people, when you forecast, people love to forecast. What do they typically do? I'm going to take the average of these numbers, and that's what we should be doing. You take the average of our health insurance increases, and we're around 3%. Is that a smart thing to do? No. Because we know 3 years we were over 10% or close to 10%, right? And we had to take corrective action to get it to where it is. So the numbers in and of themselves, without putting in what you know about the organization and the context, if you're just looking at the numbers, you're going to be misled by them. So we're assuming 5% on health insurance, which is probably low, but it's going to bounce around. Debt service, we're assuming the fire station moves forward. It's about a $15 million project overall right now, based on the last meeting we had with everybody in this room except for the schools. Key budgets, 3.5% is what we need roughly to sustain. Sometimes we can go below that if we have service demands, like if we have dropping enrollment, we can afford to reduce a couple teachers, or if something goes crazy on health insurance, sometimes it needs to be a little bit more. But the model is roughly 3.5% to 4% out annually. So these are our budgets up top here. Northborough K-8, Algonquin. This is debt service for the high school. This is Assabet, debt service for Assabet, Lincoln Street School Building Project. This is the town departments, police, fire, DPW, overall administration. And then down here are undistributed expenses, employee benefits, building liability, debt service, our reserve fund, OPEB, solid waste subsidy, all that stuff. So based on the assumptions that I just went over, these budgets now go from fiscal 20 to fiscal 24. On the revenue side, we're looking at 2.5 increase. This is the new growth we talked about, our levy limit. All the debt exclusions for the buildings that we have already done. We've modeled the fire station debt service for the fire station project because we know that's coming in the next couple of years. And here's why we're unique. If we were at the maximum of Prop 2.5, if when we were building the mall and we had that great revenue growth, if we had just spent all that money and we weren't conservative in our budgets, we would need an override in fiscal 20 to sustain the services that we have right now. Because we have levy capacity, and under our model, we will dip into it as needed. This yellow line, this is our unused levy capacity. So in fiscal 20, under this model of modest increases, we're going to dip into our levy capacity over $800,000. Now, I hope at the time at which we set the tax rate, it's not that high. I hope we get a little bit more state aid. I hope we get a little bit more new growth. I hope we're able to apply some of our overlay account because we don't get a lot of abatements and things like that. It will be less than that, but right now, if you wanted to go to town meeting with a balanced budget, you'd need an override for fiscal 20. As you play this out, fiscal 21, here's our levy capacity. It goes from 1.9 million to 1.3 to 750 to 70,000. In fiscal 2024, on this spending schedule, that $468,000 is an override. Now, we don't do these models to scare you. We don't do these models to say the sky is falling. We show this because based on these assumptions, and they are conservative assumptions, I think we'll get more new growth. I think we'll get a little bit more increase in our motor vehicles and so forth, right? I was more confident telling you that 2 or 3 years ago while we were in the midst of this wonderful second largest, longest expansion in US history, right? I felt very positive about that. I'm feeling a little bit different standing here today than I did last year, knowing that almost every economist out there is saying we're looking at a recession in the next year or so. We don't know how bad, we don't know how long, we don't know how deep, but it's coming. So anybody, any Game of Thrones fans here? Winter is coming. Does that resonate with anybody? Winter is coming. So this is what we're looking at. So every year we reevaluate this. And our goal is if things go well, this number here and this hard stop at the end gets pushed out another year or 2 years. We have the ability to make decisions and changes that will prolong how long it takes for us to get here. I make this assumption that there's no major budget surprises. If we have a terrible recession that hits and our state aid not only doesn't go up but gets cut, then we will need to make some decisions. Now, the good news here is we have levy capacity, we have reserves. We have time when something bad happens, you want to give yourself the time to look at it constructively and come up with a root fix to it. In other words, when things go bad, during the recession, you saw a lot of people, hey, guess what? Schools, cut 10% from your budget. It's up to you to figure out where it comes from. We're going to lay off, X number of people. We're going to constrain, services, no raises. All that stuff can happen. The first of all, we'll cut everybody's travel because that's where all the money is, right? Nobody can go to a conference anymore. We do all these things. But what we did when that happened was because we had time to think. We had time to have conversations about getting the information and having a conversation about what it is that we want to do. And we had time to go back and talk to employees, and what was our solution? We made plan design changes. We saved $500,000, $1 million on health insurance. That's how we did it. But you have to have time to have those decisions. If you're making these decisions in a knee-jerk fashion and you're just making cuts across the board, that never sits well. And that's not where we want to be if we can avoid it. But this is real, folks. You heard my assumptions, right? Did anybody say they thought state aid was going to be higher? Did they think health insurance was going to be less? Do you think taxes were going to be more new growth? I just told you what we know. Based on what we know, we need to plan accordingly. This is what we're looking at. Our job collectively is to forestall us running out of levy capacity for more than 5 years. That's going to be harder if we're in a recession. But what does that mean? When someone comes to you and says, I'd like all-day kindergarten free right now, today, and the superintendent says, we can't afford it, we might try to phase it. Is that a more prudent approach that I hope you would support? Yeah. If the fire chief comes to me and says he needs 10 more guys and we study it, and we say we can't afford 10 more guys, but maybe we can afford 2 or 3 more phased in over 2 or 3 or 4 years. A more prudent approach? Yes. Can we sustain it? We believe so. We are a maturing organization. Our revenues have matured with us. The bigger context of the economy, not growing. So what does that mean? We need to make decisions accordingly. So again, we're not in a bad place. We are in better shape than the vast majority of municipalities that are out there. We have reserves. You know why you're in better shape? Because you really know where you are. And you know it based on actual objective criteria and indicators and information. It's not just relying on me saying we're in good shape or you feeling like you're in good shape. We all do this. If you financially, if things are going well for you, you got a raise, your family members are in good shape, you think things are good. But the person next to you got laid off. These take all that out, and it looks at us as a corporate entity. Where are we? Where are we going? So if we look at, here's the other lesson, the other thing that we need to be cognizant of as we grow budgets and as we respond to service requests for expansions. This is the tax impact. 4.7% all the way up 7, so somewhere between 4 to 7% increases in tax bills. Again, why are we seeing that? Well, expenses are going up. Retirement, health insurance, all this stuff is escalating. Hotel and meals tax isn't growing right now. State aid isn't growing right now. 80% of the budget's taxes. The pressure for us over the next 5 years, the pressure is going to be on our tax bills. And again, it doesn't mean taxes don't go up. They're going to go up. But it means that every decision we make is going to push these numbers higher than what we're projecting here or a little bit lower than what we're projecting here. And those are the things that you need to keep in mind. Here's a graph of the average single-family home tax bill. This is the recession, relatively flat. This is sort of back to normal. Here's what we're projecting as we go out. We need about a $250, $260 increase on the average single-family tax bill to support the level service budget. So increases in energy and health insurance and wages and everything. That's what we need. That's what you're seeing through here. This is going to continue to escalate up, though. Again, I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm not telling you this to say that we can't do anything. But you need to be cognizant, because as elected officials and appointed officials, people are, A, coming to you with the things that they want to see happen, and they're relying on you to tell them whether or not you're going to support it. And B, the most important thing, the reason for your very existence, other than the day-to-day guidance that you give as policy boards, is when you get to town meeting, it's your job to recommend whether or not that budget is something you feel you can support, and that project, that capital project, is something that you can support. Now, we've been lucky. So 10 years, unanimous support, every operating budget, every project, because we have good information. But, you know, this is what we're looking at. You just need to be aware of that. So this is one of my last slides, financial projections and outlook. So as I stand here tonight, again, this isn't bad information. Here's what I want to keep. Think of it this way. Compare yourself to your neighbor. If you have money in your retirement account, emergency money in your savings account, your car is maintained and in good shape and relatively new, your house is maintained, your furnace is relatively new and you're in good shape, and you've got money to do the things that you really need to and want to do, versus your neighbor who has no money in their retirement, is driving a car that's ready to die, has no money in their savings account, no financial reserves. So if they get sick or they lose their job, in 1 month they can't make a mortgage payment, okay? We are not that neighbor. We are solid. And we just need to make sure that we're watching all of this stuff as we move forward to make sure that we stay solid. And when things start to slip, we adjust. We don't just plow ahead. You know, right now I'm assuming budgets can increase over that 5-year period at 3.5% or 4%. That might not be a reasonable increase over those 5 years. Maybe it's 3%. Maybe it's less. Our job is to tell you if it's less, this is what it looks like. It doesn't include all-day free kindergarten. It doesn't include new police officers and firefighters. It doesn't include an escalated OPEB payment. It doesn't include an escalated road management program. You might be scaling some of those things back. But again, when you make these decisions, it's our job to make sure that you know what the repercussions of them are. You know? And we're always going to recommend the things that make the most sense in the long run overall. We're assuming that excess levy capacity is used up and available. If we don't have that pressure relief valve, things would be very, very different. The budget discussions and the town meeting will be very different if we didn't have that. The last item here assumes no major budget surprises. That means no tornadoes, no hurricanes, no cuts in state aid mid-year, no horrible recession where nobody buys a new car. Every year there's a surprise, right? Every year or every other year there's a surprise. These assumptions, I don't know what that surprise is going to be. These assumptions are that we're not looking at a surprise. But when one materializes, you need to regroup, put it into your assumptions, and figure out where you're going. Conclusion here is we're going to continue funding OPEB. We will continue, even if we have a good year this year with health insurance, we're going to get the Insurance Advisory Committee together, which is all of the bargaining units from all of the unions. We're going to bring them together and show them if it's a good year, why it's a good year, and then talk about when it gets bad again, and it will get bad, these are our options. Start thinking about those options. You don't want to introduce it when it's bad. You want to introduce it when it's good. just like I don't want to introduce to you tonight, you know, deficits and issues. We're talking about what could be when it's good, right? So you can have time to maneuver. And last but not least, we need to constantly continue monitoring our financial condition. Every year, these assumptions and the information changes. It could be health insurance, it could be state aid, it could be a recession, it could be new state mandates. We always need to come back, and we need to do this on an annual basis. I try every other year. One year, a lot of detail. This year is a year of a lot of detail because we have a lot of new faces. Next year, we'll try to hit the high points. But this meeting is absolutely critical, and in my opinion, outside of town meeting, the most important thing that we do all year. So with that, I know that was a long presentation with a lot of information. I hope you found it interesting and insightful, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. You guys just want to get out of here at this point? No. Yes, Leslie.
It's not a question. I just want to thank you very much for doing this. It is a lot of good information, and I do like the fact that we're all hearing it at the same time, as opposed to the phased approach. You're just trying to catch people as you can, kind of thing. And I think it's great that it's being videotaped. I want to thank the cable station. Thank you very much. So I think it's very important.
And I want to thank a couple of people too. I want to thank June Hubbard Ward, our finance director, Jason Little, our town accountant, and Kim Foster, the assistant town administrator. We don't have a budget staff, guys. We don't have analysts. This is done by the folks that are here. In particular, I want to call specific attention and thanks to Jason Little. Jason is really the one on this particular project. Jason's the one that does all the data analysis for us and hopefully makes us all look good. So he did a great job as usual on that. So thank you. And unless anybody has any questions, I thank you for your attention. And by the way, when you leave here, if you read this or you think about things afterwards or after the meeting, if you have any questions, I'm happy to stay to answer them. But I appreciate, you guys are volunteers. I appreciate that you chose to spend the evening discussing this instead of being with your family, because you know how important it is and because you care about this town like I do. So thank you to all of you for everything that you do to make sure that we stay in a good financial condition. Thank you.